Good morning. Happy Election Day. Please vote. I wore as much red, white, and blue as I could possibly muster today. These un-American people didn't even consider it. Nate Elise is wearing blue. I'm just kidding, guys. Obviously just kidding. A lot going on today, not just with that, but also Penn State football. I don't know if you guys know this. Lost to Ohio State on Saturday, so we got to talk about that. And despite the fact that it was a 7-point difference, it felt much wider than that. We're going to get into the details. James Franklin's press conference. For those of you who he makes your blood boil, you're going to see him and hear from him today. I think some profound stuff, and Nate Bauer is going to get into that in just a little bit between the lines. We're going to get into Fitz's recruiting update and, of course, the BWI mailbag. So many great questions this week. So what I'm going to try and do, when the question fits the conversation we're having throughout the show, I want to dabble those in so that we're not trying to crush all of your questions into the final 20 minutes of the show, because usually the really good questions, we're already going to talk about that stuff. And I want to give you guys credit for having those thoughts as the same as we do. So that's what's coming up on the show today. Fitz, we'll get to you in just 1 second. Nate, I want to hear from you. You had a long day yesterday because Penn State basketball is back. For our basketball heads out in the crowd,
yeah,
is back.
There's a few.
Tell us about it.
There's a few. They did it. They won the game. Penn State. I was brain dead by the end of the game, but I followed long. It was good because the game stopped being competitive when I mentally checked out at halftime. So
perfect.
Penn State scored 54 points in the first half. It was actually kind of funny. They didn't really get into significant double-digit lead territory until about 10 minutes in. Just a little disjoint, all the stuff that you would expect. But then they just mauled Binghamton, right? So Binghamton just didn't have the ball handlers. They didn't have the shooting. And Penn State has length and athleticism that it did not have last year.
Yeah, that's pretty clear. I went to some stuff this summer in your place, and wow, that is a team that looks like a basketball team. And that's been the trend under Mike Rhodes. Even if the transfer portal players and all that stuff didn't really gel in the first season, they look like a basketball team. So just one quick question. Are they going to be good this year?
I feel like I think so. Yeah, I think so. I wouldn't, I don't feel as strongly as I did about the second season under Micah Shrewsbury. I liked the collection of talent just a little bit more. I think that Penn State is short one forward, one power forward. They have a ton of wings, and they actually have some guys that will play that were in street clothes last night. Miles Goodman is out, and Eli Rice is out, but both should be back. Both should be okay. It's going to be interesting. It should be an engaging, interesting season to see how, the whole thing about this team is that they can and probably will look different every night. And that is by design. And so you really won't we'll see. Right. You just
very good.
We'll see how all those combinations work out. So, but a good start for sure.
Everyone 101 in broadcasting is start with your strongest topic. So of course we're talking about Penn State basketball here on the Penn State football show. But you know what? Sometimes you got to eat your vegetables, and there are other things going on other than football. We just want to give those a quick spotlight. But Fitz, save us here. Something you thought about post game, and of course you can go check out Fitz and Nate's thoughts on our instant analysis video. They did an excellent job. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people have watched that. But since then, has anything changed in your perspective of the game, or maybe some new nuance that you've kind of refined since then?
Not particularly. You look more and more at the tape, and it comes down to the plays not being made, the execution not being happening, especially there at the end of the game. You're right there. You have a chance to tie the game, and eventually, that's a different scenario coming out than, 1st and 10 from the one and getting a 4-yard sneak, all that stuff. So execution number one, which we often overlook because we want to blame the decision makers, and it all rests with James Franklin. I mean, don't get me wrong. That's his responsibility to get that done. It's just Penn State came up short against a better team. So I don't have much changing from my initial thoughts on the game, other than it was a letdown. It was a failure. Absolutely. And it is James Franklin's responsibility. But a lot of people got to pull that weight. And that's unfortunate how it plays out like that, because it wasn't the same. I don't think it was the same as some of these past losses to Ohio State. You weren't, in a fetal position for much of the game. 6 points on offense says otherwise, but you kind of were right there in it, and you had the opportunities, and you let that slip through your fingers instead of trying to claw back and make things happen. So I think it is profound disappointment. It is profound, I said failure like 3 or 4 times. It is absolutely that. A lot of missed opportunities there for Penn State.
I again, doing all these things out of order, but the question of what changed in your mind, or how do you view certain things? The post-game show, like there was a certain feeling of they scored 6 points. It didn't feel particularly close, despite the fact that it was only a 7-point loss. I think I found a better way to describe the officiating in that game. And again, talking about officiating when Penn State couldn't make plays, it's that, imagine if it were really windy and you had a quarterback that didn't have a very strong arm. In that environment, you're at a disadvantage. If the officials are going to allow grabbing and holding and tugging at receivers throughout the entire game, and Ohio State has a good beat on your plans anyway, so zone works great, and then man coverage works great. In that environment, Penn State's receivers didn't have a chance because they can't separate versus that physicality. So ultimately, it comes down to the talent on the field. But in that environment, they really did not have a shot. And really, when they said that early in the game, that's how I felt. And it played out pretty quickly outside of that. So we're going to get into some more of those details throughout the show. But I do want to start here, Fitz. We're going to get to this right now because I want to talk about the whiteout game, the excitement of this weekend, and the place that you can go to kick off your enjoyment or spend the entire afternoon before you head up to Beaver Stadium. And that is Anti-Fragile. What do you got for us this week?
Yeah, Nate and I went down on Friday night. We usually go in the afternoon, and it's fairly crowded in the afternoon. Man, that place was packed on Friday night. It was awesome to see, and there was a lot of people in blue and white, a lot of people stopping Nate and I to talk to us and say that, they were there because of the Blue White Illustrated podcast, and we really appreciate that. The beer was good. They just came out with a Pilsner collab that I got a 4-pack of because it was fantastic. I'm a big Pilsner guy these days because I'm old, and the IPAs put me to sleep, but I still get the IPAs when it's in the middle of the afternoon. But no, I mean, State College's best beer, and turning into one of State College's best atmospheres, especially for the adult crowd. You go down there, you get a cheesesteak, you mingle with some friends. There's seating, there's upstairs seating, there's outdoor seating. It's still nice enough to sit outside. How great is that in State College in November? But no, we really appreciate Anti-Fragile. They certainly take care of us. We like to think that we take care of them. And based on the business that was rolling through there on Friday night, we're really grateful to our listeners for taking care of them. So thank you to that. And I can't say enough good things about it. We will be back there this week at some point, I'm sure, Nate and I. And it's always a good time downtown on Calder Way at Anti-Fragile Brewing.
Nate, what did you get? I'm always curious about the orders, and Fitz usually gives his rundown. What did you get when you were there?
I always have the electric atmosphere, number 8 on the big board for those following. It was super cool for whatever it's worth. Really nice being like people coming up and introducing themselves. Guy bought me a beer on Friday night. So just like from Charlotte, people from all over the place are watching this. It's super flattering and gratifying to know that we are connecting. And also like specifically with this partnership with Anti-Fragile, that it's it has been as beneficial for my ego as it has been for their bottom line. And I hope that
is the most important thing. Absolutely the most important thing for Nate Bauer. I'm also excited that we have and thank you to Anti-Fragile for supporting the show. They have been, I think, an A+ combination with us and them. This has been one of the easiest things to talk to you guys about, because how is it not easy to talk about beer, cheesesteaks, and great drinks? But they are a business here in State College. The Center County Chamber of Commerce, CBICC, is a member organization joining a powerful network of businesses and leaders in State College and in Center County. The CBICC is the latest sponsor here on the BWI Live Show. And if you own a business and you are in Center County and you listen to the show, consider joining if you haven't. And how do I know you're out there? because we have multiple businesses that watch this show that have joined as sponsors. So if you own a business, join the CBICC for the networking opportunities, business development tools, and a seat at the table shaping the economic future of this region. Don't be a passive participant in your own life. If you own a business, these things are really, really important. Not that I know, because I don't own a business. I just run this YouTube channel, and I know that's a lot of work. I can't imagine having to do literally everything. And so as a business owner, if you need help, tools, and connections, networking, CBICC is for you. So those networking opportunities, what's coming up here in November? Well, tomorrow. So if you got an opening tomorrow night from 5 to 7 p.m., networking in the valleys, join CBICC and Happy Valley Adventure Bureau for an evening of networking at the Dead Canary in Phillipsburg. Great opportunity to build your network and learn more about the Meshanan Valley business community. So if you're out there and you're listening to the show and you're like, yeah, I want to check that out, tomorrow, Wednesday, November 6th at 5 to 7 p.m. But if you need a little more time to plan, there is another one Tuesday, November 19th from 5 to 7, Penn State Small Business Development Center for the 4th Annual Community Networking Event. Enjoy an evening of networking and community building during Global Entrepreneurship Week at Penn State. So those are the two events we can tell you about, but cbicc.com if you want those details again. Okay, so Fitz, you and I are going to go off on a little adventure. Nate's going to take a break to write about basketball, or I don't know, take a 10-minute power nap. We got to get to Fitz's recruiting update. I love process, Fitz. As much as I am bad at it, I love the rhythm. I love doing everything in order. And one thing that drives me nuts is when we have a commitment and we don't get a commitment video out. And when there's a commitment at 10 or 11 a.m. on a Saturday before a noon game, we don't get to that video. But there was a commitment this weekend. So let's talk about it now here on your recruiting update. Who is the latest Nittany Lion?
Gosh, it seems like so long ago, doesn't it? You text
so full of hope.
So it's behind the wall here. We were taking care of that story in one text, and T. Frank hit up the other text and say, "Hey, someone just committed. What happened?" And the story was already up at that point. And it's very funny to see the separation of church and state here. But Matt Sieg committed before the game on Saturday, a 4-star industry safety from Western Pennsylvania, Fort Cherry. He doubles as a quarterback and a defensive back. He basically does everything. Fort Cherry, I believe single A. They went to the single A state title game last year. Very small school, but big time athlete. Like if you look at this kid, he's got size. He's he looks 12, yes, but
that's a very old photo right there, just so everybody knows.
Yeah, and well, the new photos are not much. They don't age him all that much.
Oh, okay.
But it's okay because he's a really good athlete. He's a guy that's held a Penn State offer for over a year now. You don't offer too many kids in the Fort Cherry area. By the way, home of, I believe. Oh my gosh, I just lost it. Marty Schottenheimer. Sorry, I wanted to call him Morningweg, but I knew that wasn't it. Marty Schottenheimer from Fort Cherry. As well, but Sieg is 6 foot and a half inch, is coming up on 6'1". He ran a 4.43 at camp the year before last, last year, I guess it was, and really put up some really good numbers, put up some really good film, and Penn State offered him fairly early in his sophomore year. Kind of one of those guys that you had as a Penn State lean from the jump. You just look at a lot of the logical data points and it makes sense because small school kid from a pro Penn State area. Penn State's been very, very good in Western Pennsylvania, pretty much have gotten who they wanted out of Western Pennsylvania in the last couple of years. This is a kid that they wanted. Nice little offer list. In addition to some of the regulars, you saw Wisconsin out there. Wisconsin was probably the other player in this. He was there for Penn State's win over Wisconsin, and then USC came along and offered him as well. So a lot to like about Matt Sieg. As just a really, really good football player who backs it up with the academic credentials that go there. So I think it's a good pickup for Penn State. I think they need a really good safety class in 2026, and they're in on some good ones early. And by in on, I mean like these are guys that I think they're advanced in the process a little bit further. And Sieg is one of those guys. So Penn State continues in the class of 2026 with a really good in-state pickup. I'm pulling up the Pennsylvania state rankings right now, but I believe he's number 5 in the On3 industry rankings in Pennsylvania. So there's a lot to like there with Matt Sieg. really good weekend for Penn State on the whole, about 150-ish kids and more of a dense population of them being prospects. We talked all last week about this past weekend and this next weekend being very good for Penn State recruiting, or being very vital for Penn State recruiting. And despite the loss, I think it was a good showing. You look at the atmosphere, you look at the from start to finish, how things were going. That's what kids are going to remember. I mean, obviously the Penn State's reputation in big games, especially against Ohio State, is going to be what it is. But you think about the sticking points in this, and that's what people are going to remember. And I know a lot of people are down, rightfully so, after that game. But I think very positive event for Penn State.
Yeah, and that's always the disconnect that we talk about here. Is it can go really well from a recruiting perspective, and you can still lose, and that it's about the individual player, right? And the individual player's experience outside of the feeling of the game's win and loss, because what people are more interested in themselves and what happens to them, as opposed to generally what happens overall. New offer that went out this weekend. Can you tell us a little bit more about the latest offer here that you got?
I will also go back around to what you just said, in that sometimes we give a little too much credit and think these kids are looking at this the same way we do, or the same way the people in the chat do, and people listening, all that do, in terms of like the needling every single thing that happens. Not necessarily sure that's the case with 16, 17-year-olds. So we've seen that a bunch over the past few years. You get some good social media videos. You'll get some good guys on the field beforehand, sort of taking it all in. And some of these guys are going to some really great schools, but Penn State's atmosphere, stacks up with any of them, even though it was a noon kick and it should have been a night game. But anyway, new offer for Penn State in-state, Grayson McHugh from LaSalle. This is a very interesting one because he is huge. He was a tight end who camped as a tight end for Penn State again last year, and he continued to grow. And now all of a sudden he's an offensive tackle. He's 6'7", 245. He's got really good athletic measurables. And he's had a really good year for the top team in the state, who, by the way, LaSalle plays St. Joe's Prep this weekend. It's going to be a heck of a game. But that's one that I think the arrow is pointing up. We do not have him rated yet. I would not be surprised if this is a guy that probably starts around 90 as a 4-star kid, in terms of the way that he moves, the way that he measures, and the way that his tape has looked so far this year. So really impressive for Grayson McHugh. And I think that, Penn State is one of those that's in on him early. So we'll keep watching that one. But of course, nobody's here to talk about 2026. There's some 2025 that were on campus, potential flip targets. That's what everybody's going to look at. So 3 of them this week: Andrew Olish, the tight end from Lehigh Valley; Matt Zollers from Spring Ford; and Romero Eisen, the receiver from Baltimore. All priority targets for Penn State earlier in the cycle, all committed elsewhere. Olish, of course, to Michigan; Zollers to Missouri; and Eisen to USC. I believe Olish was the only one that actually got around to taking an official visit to Penn State. So Zollers and Eisen still have that available if they want it. We'll start with quarterback. You're still looking at one in the class of 2025. Beckham Kritza was up over the weekend, but Zollers came up. Not really hanging my hat on that one. I'm not feeling a ton of confidence. He's going back to Missouri this weekend. Says he's still locked in with Missouri. I know Penn State fans are going to say, well, he saw the Penn State offense and went running. Missouri's offense is worse than Penn State this year. So it's, pick your poison on that one, I guess, if that's the way you're going to look at it. But yeah, Penn State still wants them. I mean, there's still a handful of quarterbacks that they're going after in the class of 2025. Mixed bag in terms of interest level, mixed bag in terms of are they going to make it to campus for an official visit? Carter Smith, the recent Michigan decommit, is certainly one of those in the conversation as well. But yeah, I think they're still pushing hard to try and figure out their 2025 quarterback, even with Beckham Kritza still in the mix. Yeah,
it just started that sentence before I had fully formed. How many more spots do they have left? Like I'm curious that they've got a good number of players, and I know the numbers don't mean as much as they used to, but at a certain point you do have to start making some decisions. So you've got a long list of talent still out there, and there's a long list of players, and it feels like some names are still cropping up, like Romero Eisen, which we'll get to hear in a second, in part of a second conversation. But realistically, 3, 4, like what are you ballparking at least? What's the range in your mind?
I don't have a cap on it. Right now they got 25 guys in the class of 2025. If they could get to 30 with the guys that they're going after, that makes sense. I don't know that they're going to get there just because it is so tight, and you're talking flip targets, which is a whole different it's a whole different playground when you're talking about these guys. I mean, I mentioned Zollers and Eisen potentially taking official visits, and I'm not sure that it comes to that, but you've got a month until signing day as of yesterday. So like there's not much time for that to work. And then you've got to work on sort of prying them away from that commitment. And you're seeing it with Bradley Gompers right now in Duke, prying them away from that commitment and then getting them to flip. I mean, it's almost, I don't know, because, and I don't want to bring up the player because he's gotten in trouble and bad trouble since, but like talking about this flip last year in the class of 2023 is like the hardest thing is not like picking the new school. It's telling the other school that it's not going to happen. And that's something that, you know, these kids, and I know that people have turned them into commodities by saying that they're getting paid. So they need to make their decision and all this kind of stuff. But like, there's still 16, 17-year-old kids, 18-year-old kids that are making these choices. So I think that's a hard aspect of it to look at. At some point,
it's also a personality thing too. I think like some people don't have a problem with that no matter the age. And then some people have a hard time with that no matter the age, where that's just I think a personality thing as much as it is an age thing. And there is a balance there of those two aspects for sure.
Yeah, and this is overgeneralizing, but in the Northeast, those kids it's harder for them to step back than like a kid from Florida. So like you're different sort of approaches on this one. We talk about Florida recruiting all the time. They'll drop you like nothing. You know, it's not even think twice about it. But a lot of the kids from the Northeast, a little bit different. So that's kind of what you're looking at here. So again, Olish was on campus with his father, and I think that went well. I still continue to think Penn State's in a pretty good spot. I know he's committed to Michigan. I know he's going to Notre Dame this weekend, and that's a really, really interesting one, given Notre Dame's penchant for putting tight ends in the league and having the availability of playing time. And I will say this, I don't think he knows them as well, which might be an advantage for Notre Dame. Like you saw all this stuff during his recruitment about he knows a lot about Penn State and kind of knows the ins and outs of things, and not necessarily something that he that drew him to Penn State now.
Right. He didn't jump on immediately knowing all that information.
Yeah. I mean, it's very interesting. It's just a case study in reading too much sometimes. So that's kind of what you got there. And then Eisen is interesting because we expected him to visit at the end of July, and he did not make that trip, but he eventually did make it back. Penn State's got to go to him and say, hey, we need some receivers that can make some plays. You're a receiver that can make some plays. He's a really good player, in my opinion. Yeah. Is he a 3-star by the industry? We have him as a 4-star 91. I like that ranking. He's a guy that runs really well. He's not like Lex Cyrus 10-4 or 10-5 or whatever Lex was, but 10-8-5 I think was his track 100 times. So, but he gets in and out breaks and catches the football.
Yep,
you saw that on Saturday. You need a guy like that. So Eisen's a guy that they're certainly still very high on. That net's still pretty wide, man. You look at the guys that are still out there, and
not like USC's having a great year either, right?
What's that?
It's not like USC's burning it down this year either.
Well, they are burning it down. They just replaced their quarterback today, apparently. So it's been really interesting to follow that one. If you think he's the problem, I don't know. I haven't watched enough USC, but they certainly have not been hitting on all cylinders. Lost to Washington, who of course comes to Penn State this week. So that is certainly interesting. But yeah, I mean, that's a long way away from home. He's from Baltimore. USC's involved. I will say Georgia's involved, and if Georgia wants him, that's going to be tough to pass up. He's going to go down there for an official visit for the Tennessee game. So Romero Eisen committed to USC, but 3,000 miles away from home, 2,500, whatever the sign at the start of US 70 or Interstate 70 says down there in Baltimore. It's a long way away from home. So, and then we'll go to 2026 with a flip target. Peyton Falzone is a guy we mentioned on the show last week. He's a quarterback from Nazareth, Pennsylvania, committed to Brent Pry and Virginia Tech. I've said it before. I'm not sure that he's a quarterback at the next level. I think he's a tight end. I think he's a good high school quarterback, and I think he's got a strong arm. He's really athletic. I look at it and I see a guy that can be a Tyler Warren type guy, like be a 6'6" guy that can run really well, huge hands, got all these things working for him as a tight end prospect. But I still think he's a quarterback. So that's going to depend on how that works. And, if you're Penn State, do you tell him he's a quarterback, bring him in as a 2-quarterback class with Troy Hune? I don't know. I mean, that makes not as much sense to the way that they've done things in the past, but at the same time, if you want him, you want him. So that's where they're at with flip targets. And I'm going to throw it back over to you so I can take a sip so we can talk about the search for a wide receiver 1.
Yeah, we're actually going to fold that into the next conversation because I want to bring Nate in for this as well. There's the recruiting aspect, and then there's another aspect which we'll get into with one of the questions. But let's get into Between the Lines.
They have both gotten reps with runs.
So I want to start with this question, Nate, and I'm going to throw this to you. This is from Northern State PSU. He says, new NIL rules mean a new market in the portal, given Penn State's clear need for immediate production and wide receiver. Is this the year Penn State is finally getting a high-end wide receiver talent in the portal? Fitz is going to address the recruiting aspect of this, but from your perspective and understanding, the business of it and Penn State's way of handling NIL and all those things, where they're going to spend on a specific player and maybe cause some problems in the locker room, are they willing to do that at this point for the right player at receiver, do you think?
They spent on Julian Fleming, so it's not that the precedent isn't there. It's that I'm not sure the fit is that right. It's a combination of things. It's not simply Penn State having a bottomless bank account to stroke a big check, right? I kind of looked at the production. I didn't give it a full-hearted effort, but Oregon had a receiver transfer. There's a couple other schools, obviously, that had some higher end guys, and I think their production is in the 30-ish catches, 400-ish yards. Penn State would die for that right now from a transfer receiver.
Yeah, especially given when that happens, right?
Yeah,
when that catch happens.
I just, look, like I don't want to, because of the passage of time, just automatically gloss over the fact that Julian had two game-saving
Yes. Yeah.
catches, right? Not season-saving, but game-saving for sure. And so that is something. It just, I think that what happens that is worth everyone's radar, right? But just put your antennas up, is every time you hear James Franklin talk about teams at the beginning of the week on Monday, the upcoming opponent, and he mentions top players on the other team and then adds the caveat of that they got out of the transfer portal, that's significant, because if you look at Penn State's roster, you can only say that about two guys, right? In Penn State's most recent transfer portal haul, right? So yes, the cornerbacks that Penn State got, that is not insignificant. That, like, AJ Harris is a dude. He's going to continue to be a dude at Penn State. He's got a couple of years ahead of him. That's big. That is a big win for Penn State. But, there is a disparity in the sense of being able to go out and pluck best available to immediately insert them at the top of your roster. And in fact, on top of that, retention has been such a huge part and piece of Penn State's actual NIL success, is that they have put a decent chunk of money into the guys that they have. But hey, let's be honest here. Keandre was a huge loss. That was a massive loss to Penn State's productivity, regardless of all the nonsense that happens off the field, in the locker room, whatever. All of that stuff is real. And is a problem, and is something that Penn State had hoped would get fixed. But it doesn't change the fact that he's tearing it up at Auburn on a losing team. And the reason that Keandre is not with Penn State now is because of NIL.
Yeah. I'm going to flip this to you, Fitz. Jeff D asks, is NIL all that matters in recruiting? So on the other end of trying to find a wide receiver, one, is money the number one reason Penn State has not found one? On-3 ranking of the classes in the mid-teens, USC and Oregon coming into the Big Ten, now sitting fifth in his opinion. And I apologize, I don't know if that's fifth in terms of 2024 or 2025. PSU is failing in this new dynamic, is what he says. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, failing is a strong word for that one. You look at where Penn State's always been, and they're right around there. Like, that's kind of how that has all worked out. Now, there's several questions in this that are very good questions. Is NIL all that matters in recruiting now? It's not. You look at how this cycle has gone and how these guys, these potential flip targets, have come back around. Brandon Finney, Olish, all these guys were guys that made decisions where NIL was a factor. And I'm not painting with a broad brush there, but you look at the rush of commitments and the hits that Penn State took this summer, and now all of a sudden those guys are coming back around. So no, I would argue that relationships are still very much a part of that, but it's a hell of a tiebreaker right there when you can go and get a lot more money. Can you put that question back up on the screen, T. Frank? I'm sorry.
Sure.
I think it's mostly I think it's a very good question, very good set of questions. With receiver, I do think you're looking at a sliding scale from position to position, and receiver is going to matter more in terms of money. It's the personality. It's kind of how everything works at that position, and it's it's a big deal for a lot of these kids. I think there's only a certain amount of guys that you can drop in cold. Ryan Williams, Nick Marsh, those guys are there. Penn State has not gotten those guys. I think there's a combination of things here, just because where Penn State is, you don't see a lot of Northeast receivers coming in and doing that right away. That's been a big time, it's been a long time coming. I mean, it's not a situation where it's recent or anything like that, but a lot of those guys come from down south. Nick Marsh, of course, is in Michigan. So I think the region plays into it. But yeah, Penn State had Nick Marsh. Nick Marsh was told Penn State he was coming. That one would have fallen apart at the end because of money, because Michigan State valued that talent, valued what they were doing at that position via Nick Marsh's family, and they were very much in Michigan State's corner. So I think that one would have fallen apart anyway, but that's still kind of like a lens on the situation, is it's going to come down to that at some positions, especially receiver. Going back, where were we at here? In the new dynamic of things, Penn State's where it's always been, and if they finish, with a couple of these flip targets, I think they're going to be right where they're always been, which is 14th, 13th, 14th, right in there.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm at with that. So
I would feel significantly better about the high end level of talent with some of those guys that you've been talking about. We've been talking about some of the guys. Go read Steve Wiltfong and Fitz and Ryan about some of the names that they're talking about. Earlier this summer, I was saying, is speed too expensive for Penn State to recruit and to bring into its class? And now it seems like some of those guys, and Fitz is saying these things, I'll just say it a different way. Apparently speed is not too expensive here in the class of 2025, if all these things play out the way that we see the tea leaves falling down the road. I'm going to ask you a follow-up question here in 1 second, but I just got to let you know, big news here. We lost Jason. He says, I love you forever, T. Frank, until you just mentioned officials. There was a time nobody ever said anything about officials. They're simply part of the game. Unbelievable. So sorry to have disappointed you so thoroughly, Jason, but we are saying the same thing. It's literally what I said. The environment the officials created was a problem for Penn State. They are part of the game. So to ignore them is to not talk about a part of the game that affected the game. It's not the reason they lost. It is a part of the reason they lost. That's all I said. And that was the question was, and the caveat was, thing you thought differently about from Saturday to now. And that's how I rephrased it in my brain. So apologies for that. Fitz.
Yes.
Is there a wide receiver one coming? Because that's what Jason is mad about. That's what I was trying to say. There is not a guy who can beat zone or man coverage in any situation, in any environment, running any route. Ohio State has maybe two of those guys. Is there a wide receiver one on the way in 25, 26, portal? What do you see to save this program and everyone's sanity?
Well, first off, for 2025, it's almost got to come from the portal. It's almost got to be a guy that you go out, you overspend for, that you make an emphasis to say that this is going to happen. People are tired of waiting for Trey Wallace, and Trey had been good up until this weekend, and then when the time came to make the number one plays, he did not do that, and I think that's certainly justified. In terms of Penn State's recruiting class, I will say Marcus Higgins has been under a lot of fire, and he's done a nice job on turning that around. But that's not going to impact the field in 2025. There's going to be a gap before those guys get there, especially the two that I've outlined. Matthew Otton's going to come in January. I think he's a big-time player. Yep. Do I think he's a big-time player that can play right away? I don't know, because he's not exactly the most polished wide receiver Penn State's been in. He is a playmaker. He is a really, really good football player who kind of plays in that Parker Washington role, in a sense of a running back playing receiver, but he's not the route runner that Parker was. And that's kind of what got Parker on the field very early, in addition to really having nothing in front of him. So I think Otten is a guy that you look at and you hope more so than anything. It's kind of like with Tyseer Denmark. Denmark's kind of the opposite. Denmark has the route running ability, just did not have the athleticism. And there's a lot to go in terms of progress off the field for Tyseer Denmark to be able to make an impact. Now, I did talk to somebody yesterday who says Denmark probably going to be a part of that rotation in 2025, which is promising. He needs to get faster. He needs to get, more ready for the college game. I don't think dropping him in there right now is going to do anything for him. Like, I just don't. So that's where I'm at with that. If you're looking at true number one types, Jesse Rogers in 2026, I think is that guy. Like, I think he is a guy that's going to rocket up these rankings. I know he's playing in Delaware. I know his competition is not great, but you look at some of the stuff that he does in film, you look at some of the stuff that he does on the stopwatch and things like that. And there are number one traits there. There's number one traits there. So, but again, he's not going to be on campus for 2 years. Yeah. You got to bridge that gap somehow, and it's got to be in the portal, and they got to do a better job in the portal.
Nate, I want to bring you in on the conversation. Let's shift now to talk about James Franklin's press conference yesterday and some of the comments and the conversations. There's the main thing, I think the main takeaway for me that I want you to have a conversation with me about is everybody in that room.
Everybody's in that room to beat that opponent and opponents like that. So the 6-0 or the 7-0 leading up to that is awesome, and we appreciate it, and we don't take it for granted and all the hard work that goes into it. But we've done that. So the reality is everybody in that room is in that room based on these type of games. And that's why you're there. And I want to make sure everybody clearly understands that, because I clearly understand it. Trust me. I clearly understand that.
Nate, you've described, I think, this before as kind of a tonal shift, talking about the playoff, talking about a potential 17-game season. And now this is more, this is less 1-0. This is less, feels like climbing uphill. Do you feel that this is the start of the clock?
Yes. I mean, I think the clock is always going. I don't think that's necessarily right. It's not like, okay, well, this one counted and the ones before didn't. But I do think it is an acknowledgement of the changing environment surrounding the program, the support that has been given to the program by people in the positions to provide it. So Neely Bendapudi, Matt Schuyler, Pat Kraft especially, right? Pat Kraft talking about it with Pat McAfee the other day. James Franklin talking about it with Pat McAfee the other day. Like all of that progress that the program has made structurally, including its hiring of and filling out of the coaching staff, is important to this conversation, right? They spent on guys in that coaching staff and expect results. And I think that's, pretty plainly what Franklin was saying is that he feels it and acknowledge that he feels it. And so they need to feel that as well. I think they do feel that. Look, I don't know. I get this. There's this disconnect where I just can't imagine why so many people feel as though everyone in that program, and not just the program, the entire athletic department, was like devastated on the rest of the day on Saturday, all day, right? Sunday. That is a hard thing when you make as many off-season changes, try to spur on the ability to win a game like that. And then the way that they came up short in that moment, it's really, really hard for a lot of people to handle, but also something that from that moment, right? What I took from it is it's not just about losing that game and not having another chance to get Ohio State until, right, either the playoff or next year, what have you. It's, hey, you got hired to win that game. And even though you didn't, you better make absolutely sure that you are doing everything in your power to get back to the point where you have that opportunity, which means winning the next 4 games at minimum.
And I think that starts, and we're going to focus mostly on the offense, even though I think the defense probably played their worst game of the season, despite the point total. There was a lot of stuff on film. If you want to go check out of the BlueWhiteIllustrated.com film breakdown, there's a lot of things, a lot of problems on that side of the ball, but they only gave up 20 points to a team that is pretty damn good on offense. So, of course, we're talking about receivers for the first 40 minutes of the show. Where do you find them? How do you get them? But let's talk about the running game, because that's, I think, where James Franklin feels everything starts, the problems on offense. Here's what he had to say, pretty round, I think, overall critique of where he needs to see improvement from his offensive run game.
Yeah, I think our traditional running game with the 2 running backs, we got to get going. You look at it, obviously when you compare it to the beginning of the year and now, it's, competition plays a part in that. Obviously, who you play plays a big part in that. But I think there's some things that we got to do, in terms of scheme to make them defend the field and spread the box out as much as possible. Whether that is outside zone, whether that is gap schemes, whether that is inside zone, whether that is personnel. I think some of the heavy stuff has been really good to us, but it's the age-old argument, right? Whether it's the run game or the pass game, if you go heavy, they got a chance to go heavy as well. They got a chance to match personnel. You bring in another lineman, they bring in another lineman.
So there's a lot I could get into from a schematic standpoint, and some of the really deep-seated issues that I think people are ready to fire Andy Kotelnicki after that game. They're not really running what we saw at Kansas for a number of reasons, but one of the reasons the offense generally is not successful is because if you don't have to take the threat of the run game seriously at all in the traditional run game between the tackles, that has a knock-on effect on the passing game, which is a traditional passing game. So you have all these issues that start and end with that. And Fitz, I guess your assessment and your view of what happened in that game with the running game, and where do you turn to at this point to find a solve for Nick Singleton, Kaytron Allen, 2 of the more talented players on this team, not really being involved in that game?
Yeah, you look at Penn State's success on the first drive, and a lot of that was Nick Singleton getting the ball out in the flat, and Nick Singleton getting a pass here and there. And what do you have, 3 or 4 catches on that drive? It was very clear to me that that's how they wanted to sort of work in their running game as part of the short passing game. And Penn State got away from that, and I think he ended up with 6 catches, which is, is a pretty good number when you're looking at that, but really, really just peeled away from that. You're looking to find a way to get the ball, I guess, away from the center, not just the center, but where, the central elements of the play, where Ohio State was very strong. And obviously they showed at the end of the game that they were stronger than Penn State's interior offensive line. And hey, tricky stuff's not going to work against Ohio State. Tricky stuff's going to work against 10 teams on the schedule, 11 teams on the schedule. It's not going to work against Ohio State. They've just
you can't have a full diet of that, right? So you can have a 7-yard run from Nick Singleton when you literally move the defensive line out of the way because you can't run between the tackles, move the tackles, and then they just run a sweep for 7 yards. But that's 7 yards. You can't do that on every single play. You need to establish a threat in the middle of the line, I guess, is kind of the feeling from Franklin. Sorry, that was you set me off there watching all that film this weekend. Sorry.
It's absolutely right. It's absolutely right. And they it comes down to it. If Kaytron Allen gets in the end zone, it's a moot point, but the execution was not there. They're not moving guys, and to go to it 3 straight times. Come on, guys, what are we doing here? That's kind of where you find yourself, especially when you don't have the threat of Drew pulling it, which was really there, and he did it early in the game. He did it
right.
That was that's tough to stomach when you go with that. I understand not having Warren in there on first down. He runs for 30 some yards. He's got to tap out and get back in there, but work him in there at some point other than running into the short side of the pylon. That's I don't understand some of the concepts here in terms of what you're trying to do. Is it a statement to plow over Ohio State and try and get in the end zone, or is it, is that your best option? And Penn State, from what we've seen, especially with Kaytron Allen, Nick Singleton could have been in there and it could have been a different result. it's really tough to talk around when you kind of do the same thing over and over again. And go ahead.
I was going to say, Tyreek Williams got injured earlier on that drive, and my best guess is that they thought, hey, their best run defender's out of the game. Let's try and run between the tackles, and then 98 puts Nick Dawkins in the backfield on third down, and that looks like a bad plan. But, Nate, this is from Big Spirit. He asked this question earlier in the show. I think it's a great question. Franklin says, hindsight is 2020 for play calling at the goal line. Don't they practice all week to know Warren needs the ball? It's also not that hard of a leap because we've seen them go to it almost immediately when they get down to the goal line. And this is not a new thing. You think about they had Will Levis come into the game for Sean Clifford back in like 2021 or 2020 or whenever it was, where they would have these packages specifically for a running threat under center. And then you have Drew Aller under center for 3-4 of those plays. So I guess from that perspective, the process of it, I think Big Spirit here just is venting, but do you have any other additional thoughts on top of those to add to this dog pile of criticism on the goal line sequence?
Yeah. One is a fact check that I did not go back to look at. T. Frank, hopefully you have the answer here. Was Tyler Warren on the field on first down?
No,
I don't believe so.
Yeah,
he tapped out.
I mean, he had a 30-some yard run, and he was like, "I am kind of tired here." So, yeah,
correct.
I get that. Yeah.
Was he on the field on second down?
Yes, I believe he was. Yeah.
Okay. So, first down wasn't an option, right? So that's, but
that's a wash.
That's a wash. Second down, third down, yeah. Okay. This is where I really struggle with stuff like this because is it not a tendency breaker in some respects to not go to him? Right? And then on fourth down, you do. I don't know. I mean, I just think that when you're dealing with such a limited sample size, right? I understand it's 4 plays and 4 plays seems massive, but it's really not in the scheme of a game. The way that James Franklin laid it out yesterday is, I think, in a different world, absent the backlog of bad feelings that people have for this game and this coach, that you would say to yourself, you know what, you're going to run that stupid ball, hell or high water. It doesn't matter who's there. You're going to lose your legs and limbs and get the ball over the dang goal line. Right?
Thanks for cleaning that up, by the way.
What's that?
Thanks for cleaning up your language on that.
I'm a choir boy. Everybody knows that.
Yes.
So I mean, the funniest thing to me was somebody got into the elevator with me after the game, and was very disappointed, and was like, I don't understand, how hard is it to just run the ball? And I was like, they did. Like 3 times. It didn't work. They tried.
Yeah.
It's not hard to run the ball, but the 320-pound guy coming in the other way trying to not make you run the ball, that makes it a little bit tougher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the criticism here from James Franklin is, I think even it's fair to say at the goal line, you are presenting 0 threats outside of the run when Venga Ioane is motioning from the slot. And he said, like, the big packages are great, but you're allowing them to substitute. You are putting less threats on the field. And he made an argument, and I looked into the data. There's not a huge disparity between their running between 12 personnel and 11 personnel, meaning 2 tight ends or 11 or 3 receivers. But when you are third in America, tied for the number of 6 offensive linemen on the field, that's a significant portion of your playbook, especially in that game. And you are not creating an environment. I'm just kind of, this is me reading between the lines. You're not creating an environment where Nick Singleton has any room to run. You're not creating an environment where Katron Allen has any room to run. Their 3 tight end sets are not working as well either. So, their 13 personnel, some of these sub-package culture things are not working to the level of the other opportunities. And when you go 3 receivers, you have more opportunities on the field for space, even at the goal line. And that's a little bit trickier, but at least, we've been saying, what if Venga catches a pass? What if surprise he catches a pass? What if he runs a rub route, Fitz? What if he's the interference route for Tyler Warren. Now you're getting into offensive pass interference territory, but at least he's not pull blocking to a guy that Nick Singleton's already blocking.
That's
And
a big
like,
route. Yeah.
yeah. So like
But-
just, and these are kind of the 50-50 hindsight things that we get to do here. And you got to practice those things, but it just seems like a wasted number of resources when you only have 5 eligible players and then you're taking them out of the game. That has, I think, been a problem and something he talked about in the passing game where you're chipping all game too, and you're not getting your tight ends and running backs into the pass pattern.
Oh, you were big on the chipping this week. I know that.
Oh,
Oh yeah. We don't want to get you started there. But no, Nate said it earlier. It's a tendency breaker to not do the goofy shit. Like it's really not what you like. If you told Penn State fans they would have 4 downs to go from the 3-yard line, you're thinking, all right, how does Khalil Dinkins get involved? How does Warren get, like, all these different things? Is how will all this creativity that we've seen and that we've been told is coming, how is that going to come to fruition here? Okay, it didn't. So the flip side of that is to break the tendency by running the football as a ground and pound traditional Big Ten game. Mm-hmm. It did not work. It's Wallace Shawn and the Princess Bride with the poison in front of him, talking about this guy, this, and he eventually takes it, and they were both poisoned the whole time. So that's kind of where we're at with
outthinking yourself in a lot of ways.
Can I ask a question? Okay.
What?
In that moment, yes. Okay. If you expand, forget time and place, forget opponent. How do most teams score touchdowns from the 1-yard line? Like what typically happens in your mind, T-Frank? Like, how do they do that? How do they?
At what level of football? Because you can say play action is a big part of NFL, and then college football is so diverse. You have quarterback run games, quarterback sneak is another option we didn't see. Yeah.
How like what's the percentage of throw versus pass? I mean, I'm sure you don't know these off the top of your head, but I'm just saying. I guess
it's close. It's a little bit closer, I'd say, to 60-40, and maybe probably that's what I would say. Just random, but total stab in the dark. I'd say 60.
Ask him a question he doesn't know, like on live air. Please do that.
Yeah,
we all love you.
Yes, you do. Absolutely, that is totally fair.
There is a point to this, which is that anecdotally, I think most of us can look at this and say, okay, they had the ball at the 3-yard line. They got it to the 2-yard line. They had 2 cracks from the 1-yard line. Yeah. What is the percentage play? I'm not saying scheme. That's for you guys. You guys can handle that. But between run, pass, they tried 1 run, they tried 1 pass. Neither worked, but I do think that there is something to the argument of, conventional wisdom says that that's an area where you got to die trying.
Yeah.
And
I'd put it the same way on the other side. The next play, it was a little bit offensive to football that you have a goal line opportunity and the quarterback sneak got 4 yards from Will Howard. That was a little watching that, there's a lot of want to in that moment. And I am not a guts and glory, gotta have it sort of guy. Like, there are the schemes and all these things, putting players in position to succeed matters as much as the talent. But the talent has to want it. And I'm not saying on offense that was the case, but if you give up 4 yards on a quarterback sneak, I don't know what to do with that.
To me, part of this is a greater story in the offense, in that you're coaching around the lack of weapons at receiver. And by doing that, you're doing all the things that we saw on Saturday to sort of work around that. And some of it worked, some of it didn't. Down there, are you coaching around what you have at center? Because looking at that tape on Saturday, Nick Dawkins, it was not his finest day. So do you not run a quarterback sneak because you don't think your center can get the movement necessary? Like that,
especially when they're lining a guy up at nose tackle, right? Yes. Over his nose.
Right over his head. Yeah. So
I think that's a fair point.
Yeah.
But the whole players not plays that Franklin said Monday, I just have questions again. In a vacuum, are you not satisfied with the idea of giving Katron Allen the ball in that scenario for
So
3 years. Like that's
that's
his
his
deal,
job, right?
right? Like that's his deal, is that he
yeah.
gets 3 yards of carry.
So let me just give you what I saw watching the end zone film of that opportunity. I thought the Ohio State linebackers did a better job at contact with Katron Allen than Katron did. He had an opportunity. He had full contact with his legs moving, and zero stood him up at the goal line.
Right.
Here's the point, Nate, though. Tyler Warren is 260 pounds. Katron Allen is 225. And like that momentum, plus the fact that Fitz, what's his vertical leap? Like, just to avoid the problem entirely, can you go over the top? We saw him land on Khalil Dinkins earlier in the year. Like there are fair criticisms to say like Penn State should have been able to get a yard. Franklin said you need to get a yard. There are other opportunities and other people and other things that should have been on the table that it felt like for one reason or another they did not go to that. There's one last thing, and it's probably too long of a conversation to get into, but I think this also speaks to this microcosm at the goal line is also what's wrong with the passing game, because they have been working around the real problem in this offense from Andy Kotelnicki's perspective. His offense is designed to generate explosive plays in the run game, partially based off of the quarterback's threat in the run game. The traditional run game works better if you've got a true foil to run the football. And he can tailor and design more explosive plays based on the coverage you're going to see and the number of threats you have within 10 yards in the run game. The traditional passing game needs a traditional running game to give it some room to breathe. And this is the reason I asked this question is, what sort of effect does that have on the passing game? Drew Aller, up until this last 2 weeks, he's thrown about 15% play action. He's doing everything on, once again, like on hard mode, because his running threat and some of the tricks in this offense don't work. And this is not a play Bo Prabula conversation. This is just the honest, frank conversation of why is Tyler Warren lining up at quarterback and taking run snaps? Why is Bo Prabula's package a part of the offense? Because there is this disconnect in the play calling that would be fixing some of these issues in the passing game, giving these receivers more room that when it's not present, you need to do things in a traditional way, and they just can't do that right now because the run game isn't working, and it's putting more emphasis on these guys to just straight up win in the receiving game. And when you have referees that are keeping the pocket, the flag in their pocket, when you are playing physical, they don't have an opportunity with their skill set to make enough plays. And when on fourth down, Drew Aller throws a 50-50 ball to Liam Clifford, and the guy can't get his second hand up there because Igmanosin is grabbing his arm, he's not going to throw 50-50 balls because he's just been told you're not getting those plays. So like that's the whole enchilada to me, is like the run game isn't working, the pass game is limited by that, and then you have the environmental factors on top of that, and 6 points. There you go.
Yeah. And it's also got to come back to Kotelnicki. I mean, what's his MO? It's scheming guys open as he did at Kansas without the talent that he had, and we just haven't seen that. And it was really interesting to watch Ohio State's touchdowns, because it wasn't a matter of Marvin Harrison Jr. being better than everybody. It was their guys basically coming across formation, getting schemed open, and then getting separation based off of the scheme, not so much separation based on them being superior athletes. Now, again, we're going to go back to it. Ohio State's a better football team. Like, they have more talent than Penn State. I think that's Nate. I believe your quote after the game, they have more good football players than Penn State. And that's true. Andy Kotelnicki, you're brought in to level that out,
right?
Not make up the entire talent gap, but level it out in a bit. And saying that you don't have the guys to work with is one thing, but like not putting those guys that you're supposed to have the sort of nuances for just doesn't make sense either. So, and at the end of the day, those guys got to make those plays. Trey Wallace, that interception before the half, different football game, different, at least coming out of halftime, different football game. So that's where you're at with that. And I think it's, you rush to blame the one guy, but like, this was bad enough. There's a lot of blame to go around, and that's what we kind of get out from. And then on the back end of that, Franklin taking responsibility is not going to do anything for anybody. He could have said anything that he said or wanted to say in that press conference. It's not going to change people's minds. Like you go into it saying that this was not good enough, and that the fact remains it's not good enough.
Yeah, I do want to. After my whole rant, I do want to say I think that they've done a good job of making these things work throughout the season, but these cracks show up when you play superior talent. And that's what happened this past weekend. But you guys bring up great points of like they're one play away here. They're a touchdown that turns into an interception away before halftime. And this is a very different football game. It's just, I don't know we're out of time. We didn't get to the mailbag. We're going to do the mailbag tomorrow. But it is a very fascinating thing to break down and kind of do the autopsy of here on Tuesday. But Nate, I want to get your final thoughts on the game.
I think that to me, and this is it's not about losing by 7 points, getting stood up on the goal line, right? Letting Ohio State run a 5-minute, 4-minute drill, right? Like those things matter for sure. I think the thing that does, should, can, will sting them in addition to that is that they lost a 10-0 advantage and all the momentum in the world at the beginning of that game, right? Where this was a game that Penn State had as good other than certainly that sequence to end up with a field goal instead of a touchdown on the first drive, which is important and significant for sure. But to have had that advantage, to have had that start to the game, and then really go mostly dormant offensively the rest of the way is just that's going to be challenging for them to live with. And I think it's going to, like, I immediately start looking ahead and see teams that Penn State fans are assuming Penn State will beat, should beat. And I think that the next 4 weeks are going to be extraordinarily difficult for this team. And so it is incumbent on them, imperative to snap out of this as a program and also to find the ways to win games that they found previously, because they're going to need it. Like, they're not going to waltz over Washington.
One of the questions,
not going to waltz over Minnesota.
One of the questions that we got, Poncho 570 is a regular here on the show, and he was asking top 3 players we're interested in seeing down the stretch. And I'm like, I was going to put it up here, Fitz, and it's like, I don't know. Are we counting on there being a blowout here? Because the question is, to start the show, is there an elite gear to this offense? So final thoughts. Do you think there is an elite gear, or even one that is consistently dangerous that they can find? Because, Mac the Mustard Man pointed out on the post-game show, hey, he saw this coming and they lost. He's right here. And he says they're not going far. Is there a hope, Fitz, that there is some sort of next gear for them?
That's a tough question because of the you're only judged on your top opportunity, and that's Ohio State. And you get one of those a year. You maybe get another one at the playoff game. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's going to change. Like, that's the hardest part to sort of come to grips with. Now, Washington's got a pretty good defense, but haven't played well on the road this year. So you have opportunities, and certainly have a still pretty good team, 7-1, you're top 10 in the country. Like, that's kind of the thing, nobody cares about anymore, but like, that's going to get you into the playoff. And if you win out, you're definitely in. I have a tough time seeing those guys on the outside, especially making those plays and doing the things that they need to do to win the football game without the cushion that is necessary, that has been necessary for them to win this football game before.
Yeah. Last things here, Stephen Light, he donated the chat. Just want to say thank you to him. And Greg Fisher, we didn't get your question. I apologize, but we see you. We thank you. We appreciate everybody who showed up today. The chat was hot. I appreciate everyone being here. We'll be back tomorrow, more conversation. I'm just glad we get to talk about this game. We don't have to immediately move on to the next game because it's not Ohio State week anymore. Fitz,
and here, just one more thing. Guys, watch more college football. Like, Penn State is not the only team that is ranked higher than you think they are, or you think the talent level is, or you think that the team is. There's a lot of football teams. Nate, I know you want to get to this one. There's a lot of football teams failing much greater than Penn State. and some of those teams are in the top 10. Like it's really interesting to see the bubble that we're in when we're talking about Penn State doesn't deserve to be in the playoff because they're not a top 12 team. They are a top 12 team. Like the teams some of those other teams that you're looking at, they're not great. They're not great. And it's very different when you're talking about Vandy upsetting Bama as opposed to Penn State upsetting Ohio State. Like the top teams are going to get the top efforts, but Penn State's not going to catch Ohio State sleeping. It's not.
I also don't think Ohio State was taking that game lightly in any way. They came in, they rallied around the whole Will Howard story, and they clearly, for as much as this isn't a rivalry, the other team has won all the time. They clearly don't like Penn State. Like the mocking, the mocking celebrations, all of that stuff. Like they came with a certain feeling about that game. So it's not like anyone. Like you said, you're not going to catch them napping. Nate, 30 seconds or less. What do you got?
You know who's really, really upset today?
Dabo?
Ohio State fans that their offense scored 20 points on Saturday and did that in the wake of 21 points the week before. That's their $20 million roster, and they are happy to have won the game, but are having the same
they threw the ball deep 3 times. They caught
everyone has lost their minds basically. Anyway,
all right,
that's it.
We got to go. We got more coming up at bluewhiteillustrated.com. We're going to write about some of these things. We're going to go in depth with that, but we got to get going right now. Thank you so much. We love you all. We'll see you later.